Let's first discuss the sunset. I will only discuss it briefly in this volume, since in a later volume of this Zeticism series, there will be an episode specifically devoted only to the sunset, which will divulge far more detail than I will in this introductory analysis of the sunset for the flat earth model, the Zetetic eye gyroscope. In analyzing the sunset, we first must note that it is empirically verifiable that the sun is very low, only on the order of thousands of miles in altitude rather than tens of millions of miles away from the surface of the earth. As is well known, professional scientists worldwide do not hold this position, and they hold the other position just mentioned, that the sun is tens of millions of miles away. Which position is correct can only be settled by the simplest and most straightforward of empirical evidence that supports one of the two positions. Both positions, of course, cannot be correct, so empirical evidence will stack up in favor of one position and not in the other. To my knowledge, it is not possible for a person to verify with their own eyes, scientifically, empirically, that the sun is tens of millions of miles away. However, it is empirically verifiable by any person on Earth who has a cell phone or a camera to verify that the sun is extremely close, on the order of thousands of miles in altitude. The position held by professional scientists worldwide, which involves the concept that the sun's distance from the surface of Earth can be calculated by radar studies to do with the transit of Venus, will be discussed at great length in the future volume of the Zeticism series that was just mentioned, where it will be found that analysis of determining the distance of Venus from the surface of the Earth by radar analysis, and then further finding the sun distance from that Venus transit distance calculation, does not hold the scientific, or more specifically zetetic, rigor, analysis, and empiricism that the flat earth position holds, that many flat earthers discuss. What I'm specifically referring to is that anybody with a cell phone or a camera can verify that the sun changes its size significantly upon rising and setting, and where it maintains a roughly similar size on most days across more overhead portions of the sky. This is precisely how the sun would behave according to the flat earth model, and it is an absolute dire contradiction to the heliocentric model. To my knowledge, most heliocentric opponents of this idea state that the sun's size cannot be calculated to change at setting or rising because the sun is rayed, thereby hiding the spherical surface of it, which is needed to measure the size of the sun. However, that appears to be a non-empirical assertion which should be disregarded because, as you're seeing on your screen now, at rising and setting is specifically the time when the sun loses its rayed appearance on many days. This is caused by the atmosphere and also can happen during the day, as you're seeing on your screen now, in a picture that the filmmaker took shortly before the publication of this volume of this documentary series. So we have a very straightforward empirical analysis that anybody can reproduce in their backyard with a cell phone camera showing that the size of the sun changes upon setting and rising. This is, of course, absolutely impossible in the heliocentric model because it would involve the idea that on the order of minutes in the rising and setting of every day, the sun gets perhaps 40, 50, 60% larger and smaller in size when it's rising and setting respectively, which would mean that the Earth would have to get that much closer or further from the sun on the order of minutes, which of course does not happen according to the heliocentric model, where the sun is expected to keep a consistent size and changes in size will be extremely gradual over the course of weeks. The heliocentric model apparently would not have an explanation for this phenomenon of the shrinking and growing in size of the sun. This shrinking and growing is clearly not a product of light diffraction, or of course not of light refraction either. And while atmosphere could act as a lens, the orientation of the atmosphere and how the sun rises and sets on the heliocentric model would not involve shrinking and growing of the size of the sun in the way seen in the sky. The filmmaker is unsure, but it appears a remote possibility that atmosphere structure, according to the heliocentric model, could amount to growing and shrinking of the size of the sun. But the problem is they are doing it in the wrong order. The sun should shrink upon rising. The sun would spread out, according to the heliocentric model, as sunlight entered the atmosphere, passing the convex surface of the atmosphere of the Earth. That means the thicker the atmosphere, the more refracting and lens-like enlarging of the size of the sun would happen. So in other words, the sun should be at its largest on rising and at its smallest when it's overhead, and then return to its largest size upon setting. However, this is specifically not what happens. The opposite scenario happens. So the heliocentric model, if it could even be theorized, that the nature of the atmosphere produces a lensing effect of the sun as sunlight passes through the atmosphere to the surface of the earth, it is specifically in direct contradiction with the actual way that light refracts through convexity.